Good? All right. Hello, CakeFest. I'm Stephen Young. I'm going to be talking to you about Require.js, or using Require.js with CakePHP. So, show of hands, who knows what Require.js is? Good. How many people use it? Two? A couple in the back. Core. Before I get into exactly what Require.js is and why you should use it, we got to ask ourselves a question. We got to ask, what's the point? What problem are we trying to solve? The thing is that with most MVC apps, your JavaScript layer starts out really simple, right? Just, animate the blog title, nice and pretty, easy. And then as the project goes on, it gets a little more tricky. Maybe we'll animate the blog title and then do some Ajax and modify the DOM. Not too bad. Still maintainable-ish. Before long, it starts looking like a big mess. And we're doing things like window.isBlogPage and is the application object defined, and then if it's a category window, then oh god, please stop. And don't forget about the layout file. That's actually from the Box2D.js website. There's actually a better library called Box2D Web.js if you guys are interested in using it, but recommended way to install that. There is a better way. So what is Require.js? Basically, it's a JavaScript module and file loader. That's it. It uses the asynchronous module definition. Anybody familiar with what that is? Same guys that use Require. I'll explain it. It also comes with an optimization tool, which will automatically minify and concatenate all your JavaScript stuff into single files, and you can get it right there. So what's so great about AMD? Two things really. One, encapsulation and dependency management. So normally with a lot, like in the examples that I was showing you, you just have you're scripting your JavaScript in one single file, and you don't really have really great encapsulation. And you'll run into a problem where in your layout you need to put this script depends on that plugin, so let me put that first, or let me try to do this first, when you're minifying everything and trying to concatenate it all, you got to make sure you do it all in the right order, and it's kind of a mess. So dependency management from AMD really solves that problem. And here's an example of how you would define a module in AMD. There's two main functions with AMD. One of them is the define function. It has 3 parameters. The first 2 are optional. The first one is a string global ID. It just basically identifies what that module is. The second one is an array of dependencies, which are basically strings that point to other modules. And then you have a factory callback. The factory callback is going to be it's going to be past your dependencies that you defined in your array. Then you define your module, et cetera, and return the module. So then some other part of your application, you're going to have another file that has a require function, which has some dependencies, and those modules have their own dependencies and so on. It'll be past those dependencies, you can instantiate them, use them, and you're done. And you can be sure that the dependencies for module A were automatically included. Sometimes you wonder, and you will, should I use require define? And a good rule of thumb is just use define to declare a module for use elsewhere, and use require to preload dependencies and do stuff. So what is CakePHP? I'm just kidding. Everybody knows, right? Okay. What I'm going to walk you through right now is just a simple hello world example of how you can start using Require.js. So first, in your layout somewhere, you're going to echo out a script, and you're going to add this DataMain attribute to it. And Require.js is smart enough that once it loads, it's going to access that DataMain attribute. Now it knows where you have some JavaScript file, and it's going to go out there and it's going to load it. And I call it Bootstrap. You can call it whatever you want to call it. So then, here's that Bootstrap.js file. In there, you're going to give Require.js some configurations, basically bootstrapping it, and In this basic example, we require the blogs library. And in the blogs library, it depends on jQuery. So we load that, and then you have a little DOM ready function, and then you go about your business. Really simple. jQuery is usually global, but typically the things that you require in the blogs.js file are going to be encapsulated just for the blogs.js file. So you won't be able to access it somewhere else unless you list that as a dependency in that module. And it's that simple. Maybe. It's never really that simple, though. Require.js is a great tool, and it gives you a lot of rope. And you can easily find yourself kind of getting lost, and you've got dependencies everywhere. And so I put together a couple of tips. The first thing you need to try to do is keep your modules focused. Don't have a blog.js file that's basically a repeat of the first thing that I showed you. Try to stick with a single responsibility principle, and we're all familiar with that. And what that'll do is it'll force you to make smaller, more concise modules that are now actually modular, and you can maybe use some of that functionality somewhere else. Separate something into a dependency for that module. That way you can use that dependency on another module. It makes your code a lot more reusable. Another good tip, define a solid directory structure and stick to it. Kind of like your CakePHP app directory. In /js/vendor, that's where jQuery goes. /libs, that's where your logic JavaScript goes, etc. And try to think like you don't want to do a lot of work. You don't want to keep configuring everything. So come up with some conventions and document them. A good place to put them would be in like a little readme MD in the JavaScript directory. So let's go beyond hello world. What if your project has a lot of JavaScript? Just tons of JavaScript. You've got a blog and a shop on your website. You've got, a bunch of awesome special effects. I don't know. If you've got a single page web app, then you just you're stuck. You just load it all. But most of us are building traditional MVC web apps with CakePHP, and you're going to have a lot of different sections. And this technique I'm going to show you works really well for that. Disclaimer. It does work really well for us. Feel free to do whatever you want to do. There's a lot of ways to hammer a nail, but I like this one. So what we did is, excuse me, is identify sections for the project. So blog, shop, break it down and create a module that kind of has all the dependencies defined for that section. And then identify any functionality that would be shared across multiple sections and put them into common modules. So to do this, we're going to change the way I showed you how to use the Require.js script tag. Before, we had the DataMain, which is super convenient, and if you're doing something quick, use it. But in this case, we're not going to use it. We're just going to load Require.js. And directly after that, we're going to require our bootstrap file. And after that's done, then we're going to load a specific module for that section. And the reason why this is good is because with an application or a website that's super complex, you may not want to have your users downloading all of your shop logic if they just came to go look at your blog. All the stuff that's in Bootstrap is going to be cached for them if they decide to go take a look at your shop, but it kind of speeds up the loading of all of that tons of JavaScript. So then you saw this variable here, the JavaScript module. Here's just a little quick convention that I came up with where we automatically load a module name based on the name of the controller, and we throw that into the JavaScript directory. Why this is cool is so that as I'm developing, I create a blogs controller, I can just create the blogs.js, and I'm already up and running. I don't have to go configure something somewhere. You don't have to do that. You can also just load a default file or figure out another thing. And something else that you could try to do is maybe you have a separate layout for each of your sections that you've defined. And that'd be a great place to just call the JavaScript module that you want to call there instead of having to dynamically figure it out. So then that Bootstrap.js file has paths that define where some of your libraries are. And I kind of snuck in this little shim thing. It's not completely relevant to the technique, but you should look it up. Shim is cool. It allows you to predefine dependencies without having to go actually define them on the module. It's neat. But the main difference here is that I'm not actually activating the blogs.js module. I'm doing that back in the layout. All right, so Require.js also comes with a cool tool called RGS. RGS ships with, Require.js ships with RGS, and it can be run in a few different ways. You can run it in Node, Java with, anybody, Java with, no, or in a browser. They recommend using Node because it's on V8, it's way faster. The browser one I immediately was like, really? But I guess it kind of makes sense if you're going to offer pre-minified custom builds of some JavaScript library, and you can use the browser to minify it for them. It's configurable, which is good. And it can even minify your CSS files, but I'm not going to cover that today. So the beauty is that the RJS compiler will scan all of your different modules, and it'll figure out what the dependencies are and put them in the right place. So this is how you configure it. And what's key here is that before, if you recall, the Bootstrap.js file was sort of that require.js.configure thing, and it had some options in there. Now we're actually going to tell it to include a bunch of common modules that are on every single page. So when RJS runs, it's going to create a new build Bootstrap file that has all of these modules predefined. And then in all your different section modules, you can exclude Bootstrap so it doesn't go out and get all those dependencies. And that's it. Do we have any questions?
So it is minifying. But if it's switching around a lot, I mean, nothing going to stay cached?
Well, it's going to cache a lot of your JavaScript's going to be common across most of the site. Those are going to be all your libraries and stuff. All that's going to be cached. The first time I visit, say, the shop, it's going to download a minified shop module, and that'll be cached. So now every time I go to the shop, it'll be cached. But
if you went to the blog,
it's still going to have the Bootstrap stuff cached, but it's going to have to download the JavaScript for the blog.
Is that common section also being cached? So common is one file that's being downloaded and cached, and then a separate request for
right.
Specific. Is that
correct? But the common is going to be common across the site, so that's cached the first time you visit. So Require is going to go to ask for it, it's cached, and then it's going to go ask for the blog one.
In most cases, it will be more performant to actually sort files.
Yes.
Than split up in multiple files.
That's 100% correct. Typically, what he's saying is that in most cases, it's better just to serve all the JavaScript at once. So, and I agree with that. It's only when you're really going into a crazy territory it became actually more performant for us on our website to do it this way because we had so much JavaScript. I also have a little example repo that kind of covers both techniques, the basic and the advanced. In fact, I think I got it up and running. Sorry, I just blocked you. Can't get it. Okay, so this is very contrived. In order to show both examples, I kind of had to be a little weird with the layout, so I've got like a whole nother layout, one layout for the basic, one layout for the advanced, and I've got a basic controller and an advanced controller, which architecturally is kind of weird, but it allowed me to separate both concerns so you guys can look at both. So this loaded the basic route, which uses the basic technique, and we know that it worked because Bootstrap.js got loaded, and I got my cool little tooltips here. Let's see. So here we go at the bottom. Oops. Just one script tag with require and a DataMain attribute. And that's it. So then over here in the advanced, and I'll show you. That's CakePHP is outputting the little script block. But I'm just loading the advanced JS, which will be cached, and then the advanced examples module, right? And each one of these is a different route that just looks kind of pastel and cute or whatever. But each one is loading up its own section of JavaScript. Okay. Do you guys have any other questions about Require.js or AMD or how that works or why you should use it? Go ahead.
I was actually going to ask if you have any examples. So can you go back to the
Sure.
and I can just write it down and take a look at those. Thank you.
I got plenty of time, so anybody.
By default, doesn't it usually load the main.js file, but you have a, can you go back where you have that function that it calls afterwards?
Sure.
Is it either the main, it calls the main.js or the function afterwards?
Like,
It was in your source code.
okay.
It was the code.
Yeah, I think it's in the. Here we go. You're talking about this?
Yeah.
So you'll notice, are you talking about the DataMain attribute?
Well, but in your demo before, you had your script tag that you have here at the bottom. Yeah, so you have the Require.js, and by default, it calls the main.js. Like, as your data.
Actually, it doesn't call anything if it's not defined on DataMain. What it'll do is just load, and then it's going to be available for you to start calling require. If you don't define DataMain, it won't go out and load anything. Or at least that's the way it's behaving for us on our side. I don't know if they've changed that in a different version or something.
I think in most of the documentation, when they set it up, that data main is defined as main.js.
As main.js? Okay, so that may be what.
So I think when you first use it, it's always loading main.js by default. That's because it's defined on data main there.
In the example, I guess, yeah, they're defining main.js each time. So yeah, let's see. Moment of truth. Ta-da. Kind of a weird site. Blah, blah, blah. Scripts main, so they're defining it there, yeah. Does it say?
Yeah, I thought it was that it automatically deleted by default, whether or not you.
Oh, well, you know what? In the advanced example that I showed you, it is not using it. So let's see if it's getting a. I'm doing this in, oh yeah, it's Chrome. So no main.js there. So yeah, it's only going to load a JavaScript file if you define it in the DataMain attribute, or then you turn around and call it with a require call.
Kind of
Sure.
Everybody use it for the presentations.
It's called Reveal.js. It's actually pretty sweet. It's super easy to use.
Good deal.
He was asking what everybody's using for their presentations. Or PowerPoint.
Well, I mean, I saw that too. It was a common theme here with the browser-based presentations.
All right. If there's no other questions, then thanks everybody.